Hey, this video has been sponsored by Granado Espada.
Let's take a second to talk about our sponsor and revisit a game I played when I was younger, Granado Espada. This medieval European-styled free-to-play MMORPG is back at it with a bunch of new updates, a new area called Altria, and more characters to play as. Over 190, actually, so buckle up, we've got a lot of fighting to do. Thankfully, Granado Espada uses a system called the 3MCC system, which allows you to use up to 3 characters at the same time. You unlock them by doing quests and finding them, and if you need to power them up, try out the automatic hunting mode, which allows you to set your characters to slay beasts and grab loot while you're AFK making a sandwich or something. Since all the characters play pretty differently, you'll want to beef them up before diving into the plethora of PvE, PvP, and RVR options that Granado Espada has, and trust me, there's a lot. So hey, a new update just launched, so go check out Granado Espada after this video. If you're like me and you've played it before, you might even want to just go back to see what's all changed. So click the link in the description to get started today.
Yo, it's Austin. The new Spider-Man game's out and it's completely flawless.
Yeah, okay, maybe not. But I will say Insomniac's new Spider-Man is really freaking good, so I figured, hey, why not make ourselves a good old-fashioned comparison video? When it comes to the Spider-Boy, a lot of people, including myself, seem to mentally compare it with Spider-Man 2. It was, after all, the first open-world Spider-Man game, the one with the good web-slinging and a sense of scale that other Spider-Man games seem to lose. So why not compare a brand new product with a 16-year-old one? That'll show them. I mean, it makes sense to me when the newest games are like the Amazing Spider-Man franchise? Ugh. But in the interest of being fair and not being one of those jackasses that's all like, the poly count on Spider-Man 2 is lower, therefore it's bad. We're gonna look at a few different specific categories: story and acting, music, web slinging and combat, and innovation. So now, the battle everyone's been waiting for: Spider-Man 2 versus Spider-Man PS4. I picked up the Xbox version because it's supposedly the best, also because, I mean, there's the PC version, which is not good.
Taking Mary Jane was a big mistake, Hawk.
Storytelling in video games has come a really, really long way. From the Princess Tomatoes of yesteryear to the modern, highly mo-capped emotion fests we try to pass off as a video game. Spider-Man as a franchise always wanted to get deep into the backbones of its villains and show us people choosing the route of chaos from unfortunate circumstances. While Peter Parker may be known for his quips and gags, many adaptations try to take it seriously. Definitely not all of them, though. So how does this sit in the video game format? Well, with Spider-Man 2, the licensed movie fest extraordinaire, you'd think it would follow the movie, and it kind of does? Imagine watching the movie, except anytime Otto Octavius appears on the screen, give yourself a concussion and watch one of the cartoons for an episode or two. For the most part, we play it straight, but Peter ends up in a series of wild situations here and there. First, you're chasing around Black Cat, then Rhino pops up before getting smacked down. Mysterio materializes into the picture and brings a fucking UFO for some reason. Remember that in the movie? Yeah, you get the point. The story of Spider-Man 2 the film was one I always dug for exploring a more sympathetic and angry Doc Ock. There's a reason the movie was and still is highly regarded as a superhero movie despite all of its weird flaws. While it was nice of Tobey Maguire to lend his voice for all of the movie games, it sure does sound like he was a one and done kind of dude with his lines.
Hi, my name's Spider-Man and I'll be your rescuer today.
That the best you got, Tobes? Now, imagine that the entire time, with like 90% of the actors. Sure, you got Kirsten Dunst and Alfred Molina in for some shenanigans, but it's pretty funny to listen to not James Franco here.
Okay, Harry, pay up.
All right. Are you sleeping all right, Pete?
Now, if you pop on over to the new one, you're gonna find yourself in kind of the reverse situation. Obviously not being bound to an existing movie, Insomniac could do whatever the hell they wanted to do. So they did. Peter here's like a prize in a box of cereal they forgot to wrap individually, so he's just like surrounded in a bunch of cardboard bullshit. Familiar faces pop out of every nook and cranny. If you're deep in that Spider-Man lore, there's gonna be a lot here for you. We start with Peter going to kick ass and stop the Kingpin. Obviously, we're successful because, well, why wouldn't we be? This isn't Danganronpa. Before Fisk tells you,
1 month! In 1 month you'll wish you had me back!
and well, I mean, he's right. Spider-Man for the PS4 is basically a series of shit hitting the fan harder and harder, which works really well from a story perspective. The narrative is split into what is essentially a trilogy, with multiple villains and characters being the focus of each third. Which characters, I'm not gonna say because I don't want to spoil too much, but I will say it works really well. Most importantly, the time spent developing our heroes is greatly increased from Spider-Man 2, and it pays off hard. Peter might look like a weird hybrid of all three of the live-action Peters, but he's brought to life from a well-spoken and acted Yuri Lowenthal in what might be my favorite performance from him. The relationships between him and May, Mary Jane, Yuri Watanabe, and Dr. Octavius are really explored here. Peter seems more mature when compared to other iterations, not like that edgy, cool kid that apparently no one wants to hang out with, but does really sick skateboard tricks in the park by himself. Awesome mocap really brings out the emotions of the actors involved, but I only wish that it had better hair tech, because Peter looks kinda weird sometimes. Though honestly, I'm just gonna blame how good Final Fantasy XV's hair looks, even though like 90% of the budget of that game is hair. That's an undisputed fact, by the way.
Is this your idea of a joke?
Since this is midway into Peter being Spider-Man, we don't have an origin story, but instead, Peter in his 20s just trying to live. He's trying his hardest like one of them Love Live girls. It's a narrative worth experiencing, and actually one of my favorite adaptations of Spider-Man in any medium. Perhaps it should be expected with the natural progression of how storytelling and acting has evolved, but in terms of presentation and performance, Spider-Man PS4 takes this one pretty easily. For me at least, this one's pretty easy. Music is one of the most important things to me in every game, be it in a rhythm game, an RPG, AAA, or indie. Music is what makes this chunk of flesh move. When I think of Spider-Man, I think of shit like this. So I was a little disappointed to boot Insomniac's Spider-Man up to be presented with this. By no means am I saying that orchestral arrangements are bad or should be shunned, they just have never really spoken to me in the same way that a less layered one does. Tracks bleed together and suddenly I'm not able to really tell the music apart from other games, or in this case, it just kinda sounds like they ripped a Marvel movie soundtrack. Part of the reason Black Panther was so slick was because the music there was very different for a film. More percussion heavy, hip-hop inspired motifs bringing power straight to your ear holes. So pop on over to Spider-Man 2. Whenever things are happening in the game, the music starts playing and it's great. It's memorable. It's the weirdness I associate with Spider-Man. Rock music, kick-ass tunes while you're kicking ass. I usually judge my opinion of a soundtrack based on whether or not I can hum a song from it. I can do that here, especially with the best song, the anxiety-inducing, oddly arranged, maybe slightly problematic pizza delivery song. One very subjective point for Spider-Man 2. What's a Spider-Man game without web slinging? It's not. Yucky. Spider-Man 2 was always regarded as the best web slinging ever got in the franchise. Not necessarily in terms of speed or anything, but in terms of how much sense it made. Your webs stick to buildings, as opposed to like sticking to thin air like it seems to do in other games. With two modes of control to pick from, you could lazy it out, or you could be a real gamer, rise up and go with the real difficulty mode. One where each jump and swing is done individually. The amount of control you had with Peter in Spider-Man 2 was crazy, if a bit hard to get used to. You'd have to like swing and then press A at the jump and then swing again, so you're not just holding a button down the entire time. Web zipping lets you quickly change directions. Wall running can be tough to get used to, but allows you to move fast. The fact that you don't have to let go of a swing means that you can do bullshit like this. Hell yeah. Although it looks a little awkward sometimes. Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4, however, was the beast that finally broke the camel's back. You have a lot of options. While you may not be able to swing in a complete circle, you can do this. But most importantly, there's not fall damage, so if you're going down too fast, you're not gonna splat. Seriously, Spider-Man PlayStation 4's web swinging might actually be perfect? Looking at gameplay is one thing, but realizing how many options you have is another thing entirely. As you're playing, there's a little reticle on the screen that shows you exactly where you're going to zip or swing from, and it feels real good. You can dive in midair to noom down and then get a higher launch at the peak of your swing. You can time jumps on zip points to launch yourself faster. It's all fun. It just feels good. Not to mention, Spider PS4 has a skill point system to further increase your capabilities with that and combat. Now, normally I would go into combat real deep here, but let's be straight. Spider-Man is an evolution of the Arkham system, which every third-person action game besides Devil May Cry seems to want to do. It's solid. In fact, it's more solid because it's Spider-Man, which means you can jump off of walls and do crazy shit in the air. Peter's all about that aerial combat and throwing dudes and things around. Now, maybe it can get a little repetitive, but it's fine. It's fun and it feels good. Go back in time 14 years to Spider-Man 2, and what do we have? Very clearly not that. It's stiff and kinda awkward now, but definitely feels decent for the time, especially considering it's melee in an open world, which was up against like the Grand Theft Auto series, which is not known for its melee combat. You did good, Spider-Man 2, but it's past your prime. Take a nap, because Insomniac's game takes the cake today. The spider web cake? Eh.
Whenever I compare two games, I always try to look at things beyond just the surface value. You know, stuff like what did it do for its genre at the time? What kind of games was it up against when it came out? And was it really good when it came out? So, you know, the innovation.
Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4, while an absolute upgrade for previous entries in the franchise, doesn't really innovate much at all. In fact, considering Insomniac is responsible for the amazing Sunset Overdrive, a game that really pushed what could be done with movement in an open world, just about everything in Spider-Man is really polished. Well, I mean most things. But in the end, you're still climbing the same old Ubisoft towers and doing the same collectathon nonsense we've seen for well over a decade now. A great open world with a stellar narrative buried in a sea of similarity. Spider-Man 2 came out in a time where the concept of 3D open worlds were a bit more novel. It would be dumb to say that open worlds didn't exist prior to this, but I will say that Spooder 2 did a lot to open world at the time. Typically, your GTAs and games of the time had open worlds where you'd be on foot. Granted, a few would let you fly a helicopter or a plane or drive fast, but you couldn't sonic speed jump your way through giant worlds. Spider-Man 2 really upped the ante by introducing that web slinging in an open world format. Crimes would randomly happen on the street, and while they could get repetitive, the world at the time felt alive. Yeah, you hear me, this shit right here, this shit was wild. Like Dynasty Warriors just crawled its way into the Marvel universe. Look how many fucking people there are. Seeing the Statue of Liberty in the distance and realizing that, hey, I can probably web swing myself from this helicopter over there. That was the kind of shit that other games at the time wanted to do but couldn't. The Peter Molyneux aspirations of planting trees and watching them grow, that never came to fruition. Comparing it directly to Spider 1 is even a huge improvement. Spider-Man 1 was more level-based with larger levels that seemed open world at a glance but weren't. 1 might be a prettier game in a lot of aspects, but the world scale and the amount of contact doesn't stack up even close. Seeing an object point on your mini-map and zooming across the map may seem like a normal thing now, but being able to quickly zip over and save some dude about to fall off a building was novel as fuck. The best superhero game by light years, and maybe even licensed games up to that point. Meanwhile, back in PlayStation 4 land, and after a decade and a half of doing the same side missions for random dudes, it just kind of feels like more of the same. Really good same, but same nonetheless. Innovation goes to Spooder Boy 2.
Ah, fuck, we're at a stalemate, aren't we? Okay, new category. Best booty.
Yeah, okay, maybe not. Let's try this. Which game is better though? Well, when you're looking at both games from an objective standpoint, both quality titles that have impressed at the time, but stack them side by side, it's pretty easy to draw a conclusion. As much as I still enjoy Spider-Man 2 when it's full, janky, awkward, glitchy glory, Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 is a huge improvement in every way. It feels like Insomniac took Treyarch's old game, injected it with 300 steroids, and slapped it on the ass before sending it back onto the field. By taking their time and refining web slinging, taking modern narrative methods and slapping on heaps of fan service, it's easily more enjoyable. I'll always have a boatload of nostalgia and fondness attached to this weird, meth head looking Peter Parker model, his dreary Maguire voiceover, and the ridiculousness it gets into, but at the end of the day, Yuri's the one that brings me home. This isn't to say it's without flaws though. A lot of the side missions are kind of a bore and some just outright frustrating. For example, pretty much all of the research labs seem unnecessary. A mission where you have to dodge the internet is pretty shit. The blue internet is the bad internet. Don't touch it or you'll take damage. Like really? But regardless, small touches really take Spider-Man PlayStation 4 to the next level. Multiple takes recorded by Yuri Lowenthal depending on if Peter is swinging or not. Little comments from Peter with every collectible expanding the world and reasoning. One of my favorites is finding the backpack where Peter explains that he won a lifetime supply of backpacks, so it's like, oh, okay, the video game thing is explained. As opposed to like going into a store to upgrade Spider-Man. Since the currency there is hero points, I always felt like that was the equivalent of being able to pay for something in exposure though, so hey creative types, go be Spider-Man! Who needs money? And the winner is Spider-Man.
So there we have it, Spider-Man versus Spider-Man 2. I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking like, what the fuck was the point of that? But my answer is pretty simple. I wanted us to not forget where games come from. The preservation of video games is something that's not really taken very seriously right now, and I've always thought that it was really interesting to go back and, you know, retrace your steps and see where you came from. While I would recommend the new Spider-Man pretty much any day of the week, you kinda owe yourself to go back and play Spider-Man 2 if you haven't, or just wanna revisit it. It's done better than you think. Anyway, I gotta go. I'm late for my other job, so bye.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to click the link to check out Granado Espada and give it a try today. Big ups to all my Patreon supporters. Shoutouts to Christopher Olivia, Fen Ikra, Flaming Fighter, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Calvin Wong, Legend Gary, Neoskunk, Plasma Phoenix, Ronnie Vile, and Superfly1787. Thanks for your generous donations. I've recently altered rewards in the Patreon, so please check it out if you're considering pledging. Make sure to devour that like button and, I don't know, hug a family member. Go do that right now. Bye-bye.